Welcome back to the workshop. As promised, it's time to look at the fuel tank situation, or fuel tanks situation. 2 tanks, one on each side of the car. Here is one of the fuel tanks that came with the vehicle. It slides in there, like that. But you guessed it, for a number of reasons, we're not going to be using these tanks. So the main issue with these tanks is capacity. I suffer from a genetic condition known as fuel anxiety. This condition is triggered when driving a rally car that will only run on 98 octane through the remote Australian bush. I think these tanks are around 25, 26 litres. The Alpha we ran had 2 30-litre tanks, and that was a good capacity for that sized engine. I think this car will be a little bit more fuel hungry, so these 2 smallish tanks aren't going to do the job. Another issue with these tanks is the mounting method. Not a massive fan of having a welded tag mounting a fuel tank. Very good chance that that will fatigue, crack, and that would be bad news. The tank design itself isn't too bad. It's a good compromise between utilising the available space and making the tank easy enough to fabricate. But you can see there's quite a lot of unused space available to us, and we're going to need to use that to get the required capacity. So the plan, we're going to start with some CAD, move on to some CAD, and then on to some WAD. So unfortunately, due to the complex curves going on with this tank, I'm going to need to make a wooden buck to form the aluminium panels around. As you can imagine, I don't have a huge amount of tools to work with this strange non-weldable material. So what follows will probably offend anyone that has any experience with this stuff. I think we have all the parts. I hope so. It took me half an hour to clean the bloody workshop and 2 safety beers just to get the taste of the MDF out of my mouth. So now all we're going to do is join it together. So we've got the wooden bucks back in the car now and happy with the fit. I did come back and reshape this part of the curve. It was getting a little bit too close to the bodywork on both sides. Got to remember that the aluminium goes on the outside of the wooden buck, so we're going to add 4 mil, 2 mil thickness of the aluminium on each side. And the only thing worse than not having tanks big enough is having no tanks because they didn't fit inside the car. So I think that's it for the horrible woodwork, and we can get back to cutting up some proper material. Okay, so where do we start? I think we'll tackle the hard area first, and that's this area where we've got 2 curves that intersect each other. And this was really the main reason I went to the trouble of creating these overcomplicated wooden bucks. I think I'll start with this panel first. Form that up. We'll then use these edges to then mark that intersection of the 2 panels, cut that out, and then form the second panel. I'll cut a square or a rectangle out, probably leave 5 or 10 mil all the way around for a bit of wiggle room. Just use the base of the buck there to get the width of the rectangle, and I've got this bit of tape laid out to get the overall length. Just lie that down. It gives us the length, and then cut a rectangle out of this gigantic sheet of aluminium, which is always fun. So we've got our sheet destined to be this panel. I think to start off we'll put this bend in and then form that curve from that. So we need about 43 degrees in that direction. So I'll put that in the bender, do a straight bend across there at about 40 degrees. Always easy to throw a few extra degrees in if required. Very hard to go the other way. To the bender. That's a pretty good start. Now we need to try and form this curve. So using the excessively large tube clamped to the bench method, I'm going to hopefully slowly creep up on that curve. Sorry, my good mic batteries have gone flat, so I'm back to the camcorder mic. Hope it's okay quality. So, happy enough with that curve now. It was a little bit of a pain in the ass to make, but it's a good fit. So, now I'll position it, clamp it in place, and then we can look at marking this secondary curve on it. So, to mark the curve, I've defiled one of my Sharpies and blue tacked the end into this little straight bit of aluminium. And hopefully now we can just go around. So we've got our second panel in position. Bent that up just the same way as I did the first one. This one was a little bit easier actually. And with only a small amount of tweakage, our panel lines up very nicely. So I'll clamp that back down, pull the Sharpie out, mark it off and cut it out. So I'm happy enough with the fit of these two panels now. I've tidied up the rest of the edges, given it a bit of a clean up, and we'll tack it together. So those two panels have come up quite nicely. But we've got a bit of a problem. This next panel is just a flat panel, and that is way too easy to make. So to fix that, I want to run a couple of beads into the face of the panel. That's not a big deal, but I want the beads on the inside of the tank, not facing to the outside of the tank. This area here presses up hard against the firewall, so I want to keep that nice and flat. So I've got somewhere for the beads to sit in. I'm going to get the jigsaw out and cut a gigantic hole in this panel. To overcomplicate things a little bit more, I still want to be able to use the jig to fit everything up to so I can tack it all together. If I do that with the beads here, there's no way I'll be able to get the tank off the wooden buck. So I've gone around and replaced these screws with some brackets that I can get to from inside the tank. So once it's tacked together, I can pull it apart internally and hopefully the whole thing should come apart. So pull this panel off and get the jigsaw out. So I think that's come out reasonably well. So I will position it back on our wooden buck and mark out the profile. Usually if I'm rolling a bead into something and I've got the opportunity to do so, I'll roll the bead in first when I've rough cut the material and then cut the exact profile I want. I've had the situation in the past where I've cut out the perfect panel, rolled a bead in, and then when the metal's pulled in, suddenly the profile's not correct anymore. It's probably alright on such a big piece like this, but yeah, I've been burnt before. So like I said, mark that off, trim it out, and one more side completed. Okay, need to look at this area next. Plan on doing that in two pieces. One bent up piece that sits there and a flat plate at the bottom. I've done that in two pieces because I can tack this bottom plate on, which will give the whole tank a lot of strength, and still get to the screws so that we can actually get the tank off the wooden buck. But before we weld that on, we need to look at the fuel pump situation. So plan on running some in-tank pumps in these fuel tanks, and the pump inlet wants to be right down at the bottom of the tank, but it's going to get passed through into the tank from the top and also get mounted on a big arm from the top. And because these tanks are so tall, that arm's going to be really long, and I'm worried about the pump sort of moving around too much at the bottom of the tank and possibly even fatiguing that big long arm off. So I want to positively locate the pump at the bottom of the tank somehow. Don't have the pumps, but I've got the pre-filter I'm going to use, which is this little bad boy. And then I've just welded up this little foot. That little filter will fit in there. The pump will sit here sort of vertically, and then we'll make up some brackets to hold the pump later. That'll get located by a couple of the sides of the tank. Can't make it too wide, otherwise the hole at the top of the tank has to be too big. So I just want to weld this little retaining fence onto this bottom panel, and then we can tack it onto the fuel tank. So we've got the tank all tacked together and looking pretty good. So one last thing to do, let's destroy it by trying to weld it together. To help destroy it, I purchased some brand new filler rods. This is 5050 LE sheet. So I've got some 5356 filler rods. Looking up the table, apparently these are good, really good for strength and not as good for weldability. I'm used to using 4043 filler rods, and comparing the two, the 4043 does weld a lot nicer, but I'll carry on with these 5 series filler rods. set up a little bit of a brace across the welding bench to help me weld all these sides. So let's get to it. Wow, that took a long time to weld, but I think it's come up okay. Pretty happy with it. And just so the next episode isn't a mirror image of this one, I've been doing the other tank as I've been going. Let's see if they fit. Yes, they fit quite nicely. And while I had my tank mojo on, I made a little radiator overflow tank and a little oil catch can. So the fuel tanks aren't really tanks at the moment, they're more fuel buckets. They still need a top and all the associated hardware. I haven't got the material to make the top yet. Hopefully I'll get that this week and we can finish off the tanks and mounting them in the next video. But until then, thanks for watching.